For as long as she could remember, Clara had believed in patience. She believed in waiting for the right moment, in trusting that life would reward her loyalty and love. When she met Theo in college, he had been everything she'd never known she wanted. Charming yet thoughtful, ambitious yet grounded. Their connection was undeniable, but just as quickly as they'd fallen for each other, life intervened. Theo had been offered a rare opportunity to work overseas, and while they promised to keep in touch, they both knew that the path forward would be anything but easy. Clara held on to their love over the years, despite the distance. They exchanged sporadic letters, occasional calls when he could find the time, and once, even a long weekend visit that was bittersweet. Every year, Clara would look at her calendar and wonder if this would be the year he would come back to her. She poured herself into her career, her friendships, her hobbies, but still, Theo remained in the back of her mind, a constant reminder of what she was willing to wait for. The seasons changed, friends came and went, but Clara's heart stayed fixed on that last night with Theo. He had kissed her under a starlit sky and whispered, "Someday." That one word had become her lifeline, a promise she held on to, a glimmer of hope that one day he'd return and they'd continue what they'd started. But the years rolled on, and sometimes when the days were long, she'd wonder if she was foolish to keep waiting, to keep hoping. Still, something inside of her urged her to hold on just a bit longer. 10 years had passed when, on a cold winter's evening, Clara's phone rang, an unknown number flashing across the screen. She picked it up, and to her surprise, she heard Theo's voice on the other end, soft and cautious, like a whisper through time. "Clara? It's me, Theo." Her heart raced, but it felt fragile, hesitant, as though her mind was trying to protect her from feeling too much too soon. They talked as though no time had passed, like they were still those same two people who had shared their dreams and fears all those years ago. She felt a surge of excitement, a mix of anticipation and curiosity that bubbled up after years of waiting in silence. "I'm coming back to town, Clara," he said softly, "and I was wondering if maybe you'd be willing to meet me?" Clara didn't hesitate. "Yes," she replied almost too quickly. "I'll be there." They met at a small cafe near the waterfront, a place they had once frequented. The air was thick with nostalgia as Clara approached and spotted Theo sitting by the window. He looked older, a few lines tracing his face, but his eyes were still that same familiar shade, warm and kind. She took a deep breath and approached, her heart pounding. The reunion was everything she had both hoped for and feared. Theo reached out to her, his hand brushing hers in a tentative, familiar way, and she felt the world shift, like something inside her had finally settled. They talked for hours, sharing their lives, laughing about old memories, and for a moment, it felt like no time had passed at all. But as the conversation deepened, Theo's face turned serious, his gaze dropping to the coffee cup he cradled between his hands. "There's something I need to tell you, Clara," he said, his voice low and careful. Clara's heart stilled, and she found herself bracing for what he would say. Theo took a shaky breath and continued, "I'm getting married." The words hit her like a wave, leaving her gasping, her mind struggling to catch up. She could feel her pulse racing, 1,000 questions swirling in her mind. 10 years. 10 years of waiting, of believing that someday he'd return, that they'd have their chance again. And now, he was marrying someone else? "I wanted to tell you myself," he said, eyes downcast, as if he couldn't bear to see the hurt in her expression. "But I couldn't come back here without seeing you, without letting you know what you meant to me." Clara felt a sting in her chest, an ache so deep it felt like it was tearing her apart. All those years, the quiet sacrifices she'd made, the dreams she'd put on hold, waiting for a love that wasn't hers to keep. And here he was, the man she had loved with all her heart, telling her that their story was over. For a moment, she felt a surge of anger, of hurt, but just as quickly, something softer, more accepting settled in. She realized that the 10 years hadn't just been for him. They'd shaped her into who she was now, a woman strong and brave, with a heart capable of love and resilience. She smiled, the sadness in her eyes softened by a sense of clarity. "Thank you, Theo," she whispered, "for coming back to tell me, for letting me know that what we had was real, but maybe it's time for me to move forward too." In that moment, Clara felt a wave of peace wash over her. The waiting, the wondering, the hopes and dreams she had held on to for so long, they no longer held her captive. She was free, free to embrace the unknown, to open her heart to something new, something real. That night, as she walked away from the cafe, Clara felt an unfamiliar sensation. It was hope, yes, but also a newfound strength she hadn't realized she had. She had loved deeply, had waited patiently, and now she was ready to love again. Not a past dream, but a future that was entirely her own. And maybe, just maybe, love was waiting for her too, in the most unexpected places. Clara walked home slowly, each step heavy with the weight of Theo's words. As she climbed the stairs to her apartment, memories washed over her. The nights she'd stayed up imagining their life together, the plans they'd never made but that she'd secretly held on to. She sat on her couch, staring out the window into the darkened city, and let herself feel the ache that had settled deep inside her. The next few days passed in a blur. Clara threw herself into her work, her friendships, anything to fill the void that had taken residence in her heart. She tried to convince herself that she was fine, that Theo's revelation was simply a part of life's twists. But deep down, she felt as if a piece of her had been lost, as if she had waited so long that she no longer knew who she was without that hope. One evening, Clara received a call from an old friend, a mutual friend she and Theo had shared during college. His voice was gentle as he reached out, sensing her pain even without knowing the full story. "Why don't you come to my gallery event tomorrow? It might be good for you to get out," he suggested. Clara hesitated, but eventually she agreed. The next evening she arrived at the gallery surrounded by people, laughter, and the hum of conversation. As she walked through the rooms, she found herself drawn to a painting on the far wall. It was a delicate depiction of a sunset, full of muted, bittersweet colors, a perfect reflection of the tangled emotions she carried. Lost in thought, she didn't notice the man who had stepped up beside her until he spoke. "Beautiful, isn't it? It's rare to see colors so honest." Clara turned, startled, and found herself face to face with a stranger whose eyes held a quiet warmth, a kindness that felt unexpectedly grounding. They exchanged introductions. His name was Ethan, a friend of the gallery owner. Their conversation was easy, his presence calming, and for the first time since that fateful call from Theo, Clara felt the weight on her heart ease just a little. They talked about the art, about their lives, and she found herself laughing again, realizing how long it had been since she had felt light. Over the next few weeks, Clara and Ethan began to meet more frequently. They shared quiet coffee shop mornings and long walks in the city, their bond growing stronger with each passing day. She was careful, hesitant even, afraid to let her heart hope for anything new. But Ethan was patient, understanding her fears without pressing her for answers. One evening, as they sat on a park bench watching the sun dip below the horizon, Ethan turned to her, his expression soft yet serious. "Clara," he began, "I know there's someone you're still carrying. I can see it in your eyes sometimes, and I understand if you're not ready. But I want you to know that I'm here, whenever you are." Tears welled up in Clara's eyes as she listened, the pain of her past mingling with a newfound hope. She realized that her heart was finally beginning to heal, piece by piece, with each moment spent with someone who cared for her as she was, broken and whole all at once. Slowly, gently, Clara let her walls down, opening herself to Ethan in ways she hadn't allowed herself to with anyone since Theo. She told him about the years she'd waited, the hurt, and the call that had shattered her last hope. and he listened without judgment, his presence a soothing balm to her scars. As the months passed, their love blossomed. Ethan showed her a love that was patient, honest, and real. It wasn't built on grand promises or years of waiting. It was steady, present, something she could trust without fear. One day, Clara found herself back at that cafe, the same one where she had said goodbye to Theo. She was alone, reminiscing, letting go of whatever lingering fragments of the past she'd held onto. And as she sat there, she felt a quiet peace settle in, a sense of closure she hadn't thought possible. When she returned home, Ethan was waiting for her, his smile warm and welcoming as he wrapped her in his arms. And in that moment, Clara knew. She had finally found her true love, the one who had come into her life not in a rush of passion, but with a steadfast patience that could weather any storm. Clara's heart had been broken, yes, but in the end, it had led her to a love that was all the more beautiful because of it. And as she looked at Ethan, she knew that this love, this life they had begun to build together, was the one she'd been waiting for all along.